Once upon a time, there was a kid named Christopher who loved learning about people and what made them tick. Every day, he asked big questions, studied psychology and philosophy, and felt drawn to working with older adults. One day, he started working in dementia care, supporting people at the end of their lives. Because of that, he became interested in bioethics and how healthcare can address aging. Because of that, he got interested in technology and innovation and building programs that can reimagine what it means to age. Until finally, he found himself at GenSpace, helping to lead a movement to challenge aging stereotypes and empower older adults. And ever since that day, he's been pushing boundaries, creating meaningful experiences, and proving that growing older means growing bolder.
Welcome to A Life Worth Working, a podcast about how we get to the soul of work. We're your hosts, Michelle Weiss and Dana Walsh. I'm an education and workforce strategist, and Dana is a senior pastor at a progressive church.
As always, we love hearing your comments, questions, and thoughts. So please know you can email us at any time
at hello@alifeworthworking.com. In this episode, we chat with Christopher Leech, Executive Director of the Wallace Annenberg GenSpace, which is a community center located in the Koreatown neighborhood of LA. The GenSpace isn't your typical senior center.
What really sets GenSpace apart, first of all, is it looks very different. It has a very sleek design, a very uniquely shaped building architecturally. If you're walking by it in Koreatown, you're kind of curious about what it is. And then when you come into the space, it's got tons of windows. Everything is sort of angular. It's in a circle, and there's different classrooms and different program spaces. It's all glass. And so it's really designed to encourage people to be curious, to try new things, and to be active and engaged and in community with other folks. We've got programs around fitness. We've got horticultural therapy. We do art-based programs. Really, what we're trying to inspire is for people to feel like they can be beginners again and try something new, which I think, unfortunately, sometimes as folks get older, we get comfortable and maybe we don't want to be in that uncomfortable space of trying something new for the first time. And I think there's what we call crystallized intelligence as you get older, and there's a lot of benefit to that because you have wisdom and you have all of the experiences that you carry with you throughout your life. But also, I think there's a lot of benefit to the fluid intelligence where you are vulnerable and you are trying something new for the first time. And I think folks that are a little bit more curious and open to trying those new things, even if it doesn't seem easy at first, I think it's a really good antidote as you get older to help you age a little bit better.
It's surprising when you meet Christopher because he's very young, and from an even younger age, he knew that he wanted to dedicate his time to the folks he lovingly calls the olders. This all started when he was growing up as a teenager in Sacramento.
So my grandfather had dementia and actually lived with my family growing up. And so it was that sort of multi-generational experience. And my mom was his caregiver. And then I also sort of pitched in as much as you can as a 15, 16-year-old. And after he passed away, I think as part of my mom's grieving process, she had always been a homemaker. And she ended up getting a part-time job working at this adult day program for folks living with Alzheimer's and dementia that was through the city. And so when it came time for me to do my volunteer work, I ended up going to that space and doing volunteer work because I had that experience working with my grandfather. And it just was a space that I found really interesting. It was always kind of spontaneous, and every day something different happened. And they ended up offering me a job at 16 to be a caregiver there. And then I ended up working there through high school and through college. But I also, had friends who were working like at McDonald's or who were lifeguards. And I thought this job just seemed so much more interesting, and it required a lot of just spontaneity, like problems came up, but also a lot of joy. And it was just such an interesting puzzle to try and solve that with the folks that I got to meet. And there was also just such living history. I mean, the program was located on the property of a synagogue and a space that they rented out. And so some of the folks that we were taking care of were people that had been, lived through the Holocaust and had those tattoos from that experience on their arms. It was also incredibly racially diverse to be able to be exposed to folks from all over the city, which, I mean, I had some of that experience, where I grew up, but not enough. And I think that experience was very formative. And to hear all those different stories and backgrounds, even just they were all from Sacramento, but their stories were so different. So that was just really rewarding. And so I ended up staying there. And then I went to UC Davis for college and I was able to commute and continue to work there. And it was just a really interesting experience.
Wow. That's so powerful. I also love that at 16 that you felt intrigued by that work and curious to get to know the living histories of people much older than you. That's remarkable.
I think it's also neat to hear that your mother is the one who started the experience, and somehow I think her modeling that volunteer work led you to the work as well. It's neat to see that kind of exemplar.
Yeah, 100%. I think so. My mom is a very gregarious, outgoing, spontaneous person. And so I think I learned some of the ways of interacting with folks from her as well.
I love how much you've talked about curiosity. That's been a theme that's come up a lot in our podcast. And I loved how you even mentioned the architecture of GenSpace evokes curiosity and how you see curiosity in the older adults you work with and in these multi-generational experiences. How about for you? What's been the role of curiosity in your career path?
Good question. I think probably the places where I'm most activated in work are in spaces of sort of experimentation and innovation and trying things for the first time. And there's, I think, a curiosity to that. I do find that I can get a little demotivated when I'm in a work environment where it's very sort of rigid and bureaucratic and you're sort of just repeating the same processes. My brain is very drawn to let's do something outside the box and try this for the first time. And so that's what I love about the work that I got to do at Senior Planet. Even since then, I worked at Brookdale and did a lot of program development for them. And then now that's certainly a part of my experience now. I just like sort of tinkering and experimenting and seeing how people react. And I've learned, I didn't really know any of this through any formal training, but have learned about, human-centered design and bringing in folks early in the process, getting their feedback and building something based on that rather than sort of the top-down approach. So some of that I think has been sort of formative in my career journey as well.
Yeah. You mentioned early on that in the GenSpace, you're encouraging folks to do things that are unfamiliar and that they are not expert in. And it clearly comes from your penchant for trying things and experimenting with things. Do you ever have kind of explicit discussions with the GenSpace participants on learning how to fail?
It's a good question. So I just started in October, so I'm relatively new. And we haven't done that yet, but I just had a member in here yesterday who brought up this idea that she said that she and several of her friends were talking and she felt like since they turned 75 specifically, that they really felt like they felt more frail and like it wasn't easy for them to move and do fitness as they used to. And she set up an appointment with me and wanted to talk to me and say, I'm doing these fitness classes, but I think you should know that um, the instructors are pushing us, but it's hard. And I feel like, I have been talking with my friends about, do we need to lower the bar? And I have to say, and what do I know? I'm 37, but I mean, I've done this work for 20 years and I've been sort of steeped in gerontology research. And even as we've been thinking about our programs, I've been trying to understand well, what's the best way to recommend how many fitness classes and what type of fitness classes. But it was definitely a moment that just made me reflect. And I don't really have the answer for it other than what we talked about, which was I feel like we need to get a group together and maybe we need to have a weekly conversation about this with a mix of other people that are your age or older, because, the optimist in me wants to say well, I know Tony is 85 and she still goes to dancing and it's great for her, but I can't tell that to this member. I don't know if it's genetics or if it's attitude or if it's something, a mix of that. And so I don't have the answer other than I think them being in conversation and them seeing more representation of other people in their age cohort still trying things hopefully will inspire them. But it's tricky, right? To convince somebody to be vulnerable and maybe try, even though you're not going to be as good as you used to be. I think it's really critical to the work that we do to be able to have those conversations. So not yet, I guess I would say, but
Mm.
I think it's a
Yeah.
really good question.
Do you think of your trajectory as a kind of calling?
It's interesting. I feel like I've had a very up and down journey in terms of faith and spirituality. I would say when I was in my college years studying philosophy after going to a Catholic high school and studying theology, I was very anti spirituality and religion. And I think as I've sort of gotten a little bit older and had all the experience that I've had, I've sort of found ways to open myself up a little bit more to seeing the world in a spiritual way. So I don't know exactly like if I would call it a calling or something that's exactly driving me towards it. But I do think, like, as we move through the world and all of the choices we make, like, eventually you cobble together some sense of meaning. And I
Hmm.
think, like, as a result of that, like, probably in a way it is a calling, right? Because at the end of the day, like, I keep finding myself drawn back to this population, even coming to GenSpace from my last job. I was working for a tech startup that was focused on aging, but I was no longer directly working with older adults. I was more kind of working in the industry and going to conferences. And when I saw this role and got this opportunity, it's definitely lighting me up more than my
Mm.
previous experience. So I don't know. Maybe it is a calling in a way.
Mm.
How do you describe to people what you do?
It's honestly, it's not something that like at a cocktail party, I've actually talked to my husband about this. Like, I don't have a good elevator pitch when I'm out with people like at a bar
Yeah.
because if you tell someone like, oh, I work at a community-based center for older adults, like, it's a really different space. I feel like they kind of just think like, oh, that's so sweet. You work with seniors. And like that is what I do. And it is sweet. And I'm proud to work with seniors, but I don't feel like it quite captures it. So yeah, I'm kind of working on my elevator pitch, but I think what I say is, I work at this really outside of the box senior center. We're really focused on changing what it means to age. Sometimes people are excited and leaning and they're curious about it, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
Come to accept that.
Yeah, I can imagine it's hard, like in a loud party environment, to describe to people what you do.
Yep.
Yeah, Michelle and I both encounter that in our work as well. We know your pain.
But I have to say, I think it used to bother me more before. And there's something, I don't know if it is because I'm really happy in my current role, but I'm like, you know what? I feel like my last job maybe sounded better at a party, but
Mm.
I wasn't lit up. And
Mhm.
this job maybe doesn't sound as good at a party, but I am lit up. And at the end of the day, I'm the one that has to get out of bed and come here and feel inspired to work every day. So that's all that really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about how your life has been shaped by being around people who are older and have a real sense of limitation, this sense of like mortality. It's hard to deny the older you get. And how has that impacted you to be surrounded by people who are confronting the finitude of human life?
It is interesting. I mean, especially early on, particularly in sort of like that end of life care, it was front of mind. And I think it is what sort of drew me to philosophy as one of my
Hmm.
majors and psychology as the other one, just sort of thinking about meaning making through life. But I do think early on, thought of older adults as others. And now that I'm more coming into middle age, I'm like, wow, life does go by pretty quickly. And things change pretty quickly. And I think it just kind of inspires me in a way to make sure that like what I'm doing on a daily basis is something that I'm proud of and something that's meaningful. And I mean, just being around folks, that's what they do every day, right? And I think that's the positive side of getting older and maybe getting a little bit closer to end of life is you worry a little bit less about what people think and you make sure that the things that you're doing are personally meaningful for you. And I think hopefully it, inspires all of us to live a better life.
That's so beautifully put. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I felt like there was so much resonance in his work to my work and this bizarre nature of really connecting deeply with people and meeting them where they are, and this intergenerational experience, which I think is incredibly powerful. Yet we don't have a lot of practice at it in spaces outside of things like the innovation of GenSpace. So it's incredible to see what he was recognizing as the impact of bringing people together and what they're learning from each other.
I love the story of how he got into this because he watched his mom do it.
Yeah.
And that his mom's gregariousness helped him understand how he could interact with older people. And that gave him sort of like something to emulate as like a starting point. I just thought that was really neat because I think about this a lot after one of my mentors passed away. I was at his funeral and his 5 children were each talking about the example that he lived into every day for them, that he served so many other people other than his family. Like he was always giving in very different kinds of ways, giving his time, his energy. And they all talked about how they saw him in action doing these things. And I remember thinking, at the time, you can't teach a young person to be good and to have like these really important character traits just by telling them about it, right? Telling them about the goodness and the kindness and integrity and all these things. You have to demonstrate it, right?
Yes.
You have to show the example. And I love that his mom gave him that example.
That is beautiful.
It's really neat.
Yeah. And I love that invitation to all of us that it can't just be what we say. We have to live it.
Yeah.
So, Michelle, I've been thinking about this idea, and I love that he talked about how it's so hard for him to describe what he does at a cocktail party. And he feels like he could never represent it in a way that conveys to people how interesting and exciting and how much, I think he used the words, how it lights him up inside to do what he does. And I hear this over and over again for people. And I even hear people sharing how sometimes it impacts the choices they make around career trajectory because they know that it's very simple and clear to the point to tell somebody that they're a partner in a law firm in downtown Boston. And it's much more difficult to describe, a business that they've helped shape and create, or something that has a little bit more creativity or ambiguity to it. And I'm curious, as you think about that, and I know you've personally experienced this, that it's not always easy for people to understand what it is you do. How do you, I guess I'm wondering, like, what's your wisdom or your insight or your advice as you think about kind of that misalignment in how do we convey what we do? And even when we struggle with that, even if it's something that still is very important to us.
Yeah. I think Christopher handled that question really well, that it almost doesn't matter ultimately how it comes across. Because I know I personally have taken jobs that I shouldn't have taken because the title sounded so lofty and it like kind of in an instant told someone, ooh, this is like a powerful role, right? It sounds impressive. And there's something really attractive about that. And I know a lot of colleagues have kind of made that same mistake as I have, where you kind of get caught up in the ego of the title or the role that you're inhabiting. But to Christopher's point, you're the one who has to live it every day. Right? It doesn't matter how fancy the title is. Like if you don't want to get up in the morning, if you dread your work, that's the thing that matters. And so I do think it is really less about the title and less about it's even also less about the remuneration ultimately. It's really what is going to help me be excited. And also, again, back to this idea of being an exemplar to the people around us. Like I think about it for my kids as they watch me and anticipate the world of work ahead. I don't want them to dread work. So I don't want them to see their mom hating what she does. Right. And that's what really just stopped me in my tracks when I was in one of those roles that I shouldn't have taken, is that my daughter just in a very cursory way just sort of happened to mention that just doesn't seem like you like your work, Mom, and I was just, that's what made me stop and realize this is not at all the example I want to live for them.
Even when it came with a very lofty title.
Even when it came with the most money I'd ever earned in my life at that point, the fanciest title I'd ever had, every possible perk you could imagine wasn't worth it. It wasn't the example I wanted to be for my kids, right?
Yeah, I love that. What was coming to mind when you first started talking was, what are we drawn by? External validation or internal validation, right? Like, what's that drawing force into the next step? And is it feeling like our life, our choices need to be validated by others? And often getting ourselves to name who is the other, who is, quote, everyone, right? And then also, if we then turn it around and say, what is the internal drivers? What do I need? And what am I going to make this choice in alignment with? What everyone else thinks or what I truly desire and yearn for? And then also, even maybe we reframe it and think about, what would somebody I love most deeply think of this choice, right? Like, for you, that was really informative of your daughter seeing you. And for somebody else, it might be how a parent or how a friend or how a spouse sees them and whether they're really living in alignment with that career path.
She's Dana Walsh.
And she's Michelle Weiss.
This has been another episode of A Life Worth Working. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends and loved ones who may also be searching for purpose and meaning in their work lives, or what we call the soul of work.